Hi, and welcome to Pieta. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Leanne Hadley, and I wanted just to tell you quickly a little bit about Pieta. Pieta is a spiritual movement of love and compassion towards ourselves, others, the earth, and all God's creatures. We are inspired to call ourselves Pieta because of this statue of the Pieta. Obviously, this isn't the real one. The one that we were inspired by is the one that Michelangelo carved. This is a replica. But you see that little loving space between Mary and her son, that little space right there? Well, that's what we call Pieta, and we try to love each other with the same love and compassion, unconditional love that Mary had for her son, Jesus. So when we look at another person, we try to imagine that they are Christ. So this is obviously a Christian movement, but you are welcome if you are any faith tradition. Everybody is welcome at Pieta. As long as you want to be a compassionate, loving person, you belong to Pieta. We begin each session of Pieta with a prayer, and so I want to read that prayer for you now. And in fact, in these next few weeks, we're going to be exploring this prayer, and we're going to memorize it. I wrote this prayer, I haven't memorized it, and it's time that we memorize the Pieta prayer. So hopefully, if you go through this series with us, you will memorize the prayer with us. So let's begin with our Pieta, the prayer of being. Let me be in the world with nothing to prove, letting go of all expectations and judgment. May I give and receive compassion. May I care for others and receive their care. May I love deeply and receive love. May I be in the world with nothing to prove. May I be Pieta. Today, we're going to focus on the first three words of this prayer. Let me be. And when we hear those words, let me be, a lot of times we think about be something. So let me be a good mother. Let me be a good friend. Let me be a good person. Let me be good at my new school. We have a lot of, we finish the sentence, but in the Pieta prayer, it is let me be. It is a prayer of being. And I just want to remind you that I believe that we were all made in the image of God, and so in our being is the image of God. And so when we begin this prayer, we begin with, let me be exactly who you are, created in the image of God. Of course, our scripture for this comes from the very first story, the first story of creation, where God makes humankind. And it says, and then God said, let us make humankind in our own image and our likeness. And God makes humans. And then on the sixth day, God looks at everything that God has made. And it says, God saw that all that God had made, and it was very good. So God made us in God's own image, and God looked at all that God had made, the animals, the trees, the earth, and the people, and said, you are good. You are made in my image. And so when we begin this prayer, let me be, I want you just to remember that you are made in the image of God. Now, I know that if you're Christian, you're thinking, well, yeah, but what about the rest of the story? What about where Eve sinned and she ate the apple and Adam was with her? Then we're sinners. We're not good anymore. We're sinners, and we have to overcome our sin. So I just want to talk for a moment about the doctrine of original sin. Now, the doctrine of original sin was not really created. I mean, the story of Adam and Eve is in the Bible, and they do disobey God, and they eat the apple, and they're expelled from the garden. So there is a story of people who were created good, sinning against God, doing the wrong thing. But the term original sin was coined by a Saint Augustine. You've probably heard of him. He wrote 300 years after Jesus died, so in the 4th century, and he read the story of creation, and he came up with this term of original sin. Now, first Augustine said, well, we're not originally infested with sin, but, we have a proclivity to sin. But then people started writing him and saying, well, then how does every person sin? Like, what are you talking about? And he got pretty defensive, and he had a lot of letters back and forth with this guy, particularly named Pelagius. And Augustine then said, okay, everybody is sinful, and the way it gets passed from person to person to person, even into babies, is that when the man, so in the days of Augustine, you have to understand that they believed that when the man and woman united, that the man had the person inside of him, and he put an entire person inside of the woman. So they didn't have any sense of like the egg and the sperm uniting. It was just like the man had everything. So the man took the baby and put the little baby inside the woman, and then the baby would grow into a human being. So the men carried everything, and the woman was basically just the holder of the person. So just the place where the person grew. And that was their understanding of childbirth, which is pretty remarkable, thinking it was the year 300. But anyway, Augustine believed that that sin became a part of every human after Adam and Eve. Every baby that they had was infected with that original sin. So when the man gave the person to the woman, of course, that was already infected with original sin. So babies, when they're first born, everybody is just infected with original sin. In fact, the early baptisms, if you read about them, they were actually more like exorcisms than kind of the baptisms that we do today in the church. A baby would be taken to the church and was not allowed inside of the church until the priest met the family at the door. And he would put spittle in their ears and their eyes and their mouth to cast out the sin. And then the priest would take them, they would strip off the baby's clothes, carry the baby with the parents into the front of the church where the baby would be baptized, and then put on its new white garment, because the sin was gone and they were restored to their original sense. So that's how much they believed that this original sin was an inherited trait. Not that people would sin eventually, but that it was something that we couldn't get away from. It was just in our DNA. That's the doctrine of original sin. Now, I'm not saying that we aren't sinful people. Every one of us falls short of the glory of God. Every one of us is not perfect. I get that. But I just want to remind us that before we were sinners, when we were born, in believing that Augustine had it wrong, that babies actually are pure, they haven't sinned yet, what could they have possibly done? Assuming that people aren't born with sin, that I know that someday we will sin. Everybody does. Everybody does. Nobody that's listening to this hasn't sinned. We've all been sinners. But the way we were created comes from the first creation story. We were created in the image of God. And so I don't believe in original sin, although I do believe that we will sin, of course. But what I do believe in is original blessing, that we were made in the image of God, and that God looked at humankind and saw that it was good. And I still believe that God looks at humankind and says, that is good, even despite all of the crazy stuff that we do. Let me be. Let me be the person that God created me to be. And that, in my opinion, is not a sinner. It's a beautiful human being. You are beautiful. Let me be. Be. Be you. That's what the first 3 words of this prayer is all about. So now I just want to light a candle, and I want us just to be still for a moment and think about that. I want to read the scripture again, and I want you to think about if you can believe that you were made in the image of God or not. So here's our candle. Let's be still. And here's our scripture. And then God said, let us make humankind in our image, in our own likeness. And God saw all that God had made, and it was very good. Let me be. The first 3 words of the Pieta prayer. So the questions that I think we can ponder this week, and if you want to come to a circle, we have them. Contact me if you'd like to join one. And if you just want to comment in the comments here on the Facebook, you certainly can do that too. Or you're welcome just to keep your own journal and think your own thoughts. So whatever you want to do. But the questions I think we can ponder is, first of all, if we're made in the image of God, then when we look in a mirror, we should see some aspect of God in ourselves. So rather than think, how am I like God? Because there's a big difference between you and me and God. But I just want you to start with thinking, like, what about you is good? Like, what do you do well? Do you love well? Are you a good friend? Are you a good listener? What do you do well? Make a list of those things. And then I want you to look at that list and say, is there anything on that list that is made in the image of God, that reflects God. And see if you can't see just a touch of God, God's love, God's compassion in yourself. So make your list and just think about that. And then think about that doctrine of original sin. Can you believe that you are made in the image of God even if you are prone to sin? Can you still believe that you are made in the image of God or not? So ponder that. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week. We'll continue going through our Pieta prayer. Thank you for being here. Again, my name is Leanne Hadley. Reach out to me if you'd like to learn more about Pieta.